Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Artcasters number 187. And just as I launched this, I got this little notice saying that Hangouts on Air is going away August 1st. So it looks like we got to do we got to find a different alternative to this. But anyway, so let me close that out. So yeah, we are live, and as usual, we have a special guest we'll get to in a minute. But first, I'll just quickly introduce myself. You're on my channel, so I'm pretty sure you know who I am. You can also find me at circworks.com. How's it going, Josh? What you been up to, and where can people find you?
It's going all right. I'm kind of still in like debate mode brain because I watched the second debate today. But people can find me at quarterlystories.com, where I'm posting all the pages to my current graphic novel that I'm a few pages from finishing, which is kind of exciting. And then if you don't want to go there, you can also just go to the main site, which is just joshuakemble.com, and that'll link you to pretty much everything you need. And you can also find me on YouTube when I'm not on Scott's channel. On my channel, which is Joshua Kemble, you can just search for it on YouTube and find it there. Yeah.
All right. And so our guest tonight, Ryan Friant, is an awesome sculptor from the Dream Syndicate. We're going to talk a little bit about his brand and what he's doing. But so I reached out to Ryan because I really dug his stuff, and I've seen him on some other shows and stuff talking about what he does and everything. So I wanted to get on and carry on some conversation because in addition to, we kind of do the, art and business and everything. And he seems like he was more than willing to talk about that. And he kind of came prepared because when I did reach out to him, he already had like 4 topics in mind. So he's a little familiar with the show, I think, because usually usually the way this works is like when I reach out to somebody, I'll say, if they're not familiar with it, I'll kind of explain it and everything, and I'll usually give the artist an opportunity to, if they want, to come up with the topic, something that they like to talk about, and if not, then we'll come up with something together or whatever. But so Ryan had like 4 or 5 really good topics, which I don't know if we can cover all, but there's a lot of good stuff. But I think the two one we really want to hit tonight are just kind of building your brand, which is obviously something I'm passionate about. We've talked about before, but also niche marketing, which is something that I think I'm kind of going in that direction and everything. But then there's a couple different niches and which one do you approach and everything. So we'll get into that. But first of all, I just wanted to kind of talk a little bit about Ryan's brand and everything, because he's really doing some cool stuff. And I just want to get a little introduction because so I don't know if you want to describe what you do, Ryan. You
Sure.
way better than I could.
Sure, I'll go ahead and field that. So hey guys, welcome. I am Ryan Friant of the Dream Syndicate Art Dolls. I'm creating stuff here on YouTube, and you can find me on the dreamsyndicatearts.com, or if it's the dreamsyndarts.com, or on Instagram at the dreamsynd it's dream_synd_arts. So you can catch me out there. But essentially what I'm doing is dimensional illustrations, and it's been more like fantasy and some literature-based stuff too. But I mean, for the most part, what I'm most interested in doing is kind of creating my own fantasy world. And when I conceived of the brand name of the Dream Syndicate, it was really in service of coming up with this whole narrative and conceptually building out this world. So I've been kind of going from there.
So one thing, Ryan, like if you maybe move a little closer to the mic, because when you reached over a minute, it was like perfect. And
okay, well, I'll get like way in front of it. There we go.
Yeah,
there we
go. Perfect.
Right, yeah. Excellent.
But yeah, so I really, so I'm just kind of curious before we get into the topic and everything, some of your influences and things, because one thing we were going to ask, I mean, have you ever done any like stop motion, or is it just purely the construction of the art dolls and everything?
Right. So if you go peep my Instagram, dream_synd_arts, you'll find some little experiments with stop motion, but I'm doing it in a really shitty in an impractical way. Like I'm basically animating blind, because if you use something like Dragon Frame or like real legit stop motion software, or even like iStop Motion for Christ's sake, then you get the onion skidding effect, which shows you like the prior frame, so you get this ghost image and you kind of animate from there. But what I'm just doing is using my digital camera and animating blind, and so it's not nearly as smooth as you'd get in motion. But yeah, some concepts of some things I want to explore eventually is like, like maybe like picture books, but with some elements of movement to them, or like other just like YouTube content that's like short stories with the occasional bit of motion added to it, almost like motion comics. Some of the early experiments that have been happening with that.
Yeah, I think that would work really well. So you mentioned children's books. When my kids were younger, I had this. I got this book for them, and it was a Sesame Street book, and it was like some kind of adventure, like Bert and Ernie. They were on some sort of, just like they would go on these white water rapids and things. But it was all done like little like either clay versions or sculptures, but they built these dioramas and everything. And I just loved looking at that book, because it was so different than, most of the other kids' books that my kids had, because everything was all built and photographed and everything. And I really like that look when it comes to, and I noticed that one of the things you're doing is you're actually selling art prints. You're creating a scene of like your do you call them art dolls or puppets, or how do you like to refer to them?
It depends what context.
Okay.
When I'm going for SEO, I call them art dolls for the most part.
Okay.
When I'm going towards sales, I call them more sculptures or puppets.
Okay.
Because I feel like the Etsy crowd really devalues like the market value of what you can sell an art doll for. Like there's exceptions, but by and large, like you see a lot of $70 art dolls on Etsy, and I'm just like, I would rather light them on fire than sell them for that much. So and take the video of it so it would last longer, right? That's an interesting piece of content, at least. But yeah, so I kind of context switch, and like I don't feel any sort of sense of denigration to calling them art dolls. It's just in terms of like when you get into what the market would bear, that's the point at which I have a thing for calling them something else.
Yeah, and some of it's just going to be what other people decide they want to call it and everything.
Yeah, a lot of people default to calling them sculptures. Without, if they have no like niche knowledge or whatever. So.
Yeah, it's so. Are you familiar with Jeff Lafferty at all?
Oh yeah. We've had little, especially when my channel was first starting. It's when he was doing that sort of like Dracula Slayer type of character, and he had commented on a few of my videos, and I was checking out what he was doing with the stop motion project. And I'm not sure if he's still pursuing that, because I don't know if I've seen any.
I haven't seen him do anything lately with that, but it's just I just really, I really dig that kind of thing. I like, where he was doing stop motion. It's just very interesting that there's different routes that you can go. Like when you mentioned children's books or selling prints or whatever. I just really like the idea of these three-dimensional, objects that you can, sell in print as well. So,
it kind of like, in a way, like it makes you think about, like tech business stuff when they talk about like minimum viable product. It's a lot of work to do a full-fledged stop motion film, or even like have several minutes of like a stop motion short. Like a 10-minute stop motion short is an epic endeavor. So like for me, like I'd rather just do some little experiments with motion, and like, maybe if I ever got to the point where I could start like a little production house, like good, like, inflow of like Patreon funding or whatever, something that makes it tenable and viable, like then like we can talk about making short films. But
I don't even necessarily know that they have to be stop motion, I mean, because I think for me there's a fascination with that style of work. Like I'll look at like the Leica stuff and everything, and I remember I went to Universal Studios, this was a while back, but Paranorman had come out at the time, and they had all the they had all the figures there and everything on display, and a lot of the set pieces. and I just stood there for I could have been in an hour for all I know, just looking at all the details and everything. And I wasn't even thinking about the animation. I was just thinking of the craft that went into those. So yeah, I don't necessarily know that it necessarily has to be animated. I think, I think people are really interested in how that's built, and just like I said, the craft that goes into it. So
yeah, I also tend to think like, there's a market in illustration for that. Like Forefront, I think like a lot of Dave McKeon's stuff where he actually implements like a lot of sculpture and stuff with photography, with illustration, and kind of blends them all to like make this kind of really interesting form of illustration. It's really cool.
And I mean, I don't know, how you feel about even more commercial avenues, but I could definitely see, I could see that selling products too as well, or just like, I mean, you said you're on Instagram. Instagram is such a interesting avenue because it's all photos and everything. But I could see like a character like that associated with some sort of product, or some ad agency using that as a way to kind of, build a campaign around it or something. Because it's very unique, and you don't see that a lot,
Yeah, I mean, like so I'm into like mainly focusing on like the indie artist thing, and we were talking a little pre-show how like webcomics has figured out most of this stuff, and if you just kind of look at where webcomics has been and then where it's going right now, like that'll give you an idea of how to thrive as an indie artist. And I think it's a really solid thing to check out. But also, I'm open to doing, if I can do a gig that'll like move the needle that much further, like, if that's a solid like 3-4 months of income doing some sort of ad agency job, that then I can spare that time to really focus on my own stuff, or like it's so in the vein and vector what I'm already doing, like all that kind of stuff, then I'm very much open to it. I just like I know a lot of jobbing illustrators. I don't know a lot of thriving illustrators, and it's like seems like entirely an insecure lifestyle. So I'm not like really jockeying for it. But if an opportunity came about by me presenting naturally what I'm doing, then
sure. And I that's kind of what I meant, because it's like if your work gets out there, and I've just heard so many stories where basically they come to you and it's like something you were never like expecting. But I could see something like that happening with the kind of work that you do. But not that you would necessarily go out and look for that kind of thing, because for one thing, it's going to kind of take you away from the world probably that you're building, because whatever you do for a product or service or whatever isn't going to be part of your brand. It's going to be something aside from that, so, and I'm sure that's probably a big part of what you're doing, with your brand. So I guess we can start kind of going into the brand itself and everything.
Yeah, sure. So as far as for a branding standpoint, I am looking at, so first, before we get into like the brand, right? Like it's kind of every artist who has figured out their style, has a personal brand, as long as what they're doing is kind of on message to everything the established style that they're working on. So really, first you have to figure out what kind of art you can do that's personally meaningful for you. And like for me, everything all starts with like Labyrinth, The Dark Crystal, Brian Froud, those Brian Froud, Jim Henson collaborations, the Dieter Lizzie box set for Planescape, because that like it was a D&D setting. Almost if you imagine it to be art directed by Brian Froud and Jim Henson, because Dieter Lizzie wanted to work for Jim Henson Studios for the longest time, actually. So like there's like this clear lineage of artists that I want to be involved in the conversation of what they're doing.
So first, I wasn't sure what that last one you were talking about. Did you say Dieter, like Tony Dieter Lizzie?
Yeah,
okay. I guess I didn't make the connection, but I love his stuff too. Yeah.
Yeah. So now famous children's book illustrator Tony Dieter Lizzie, but and then part like he realized he wasn't going to have a sustainable enough career doing the Magic, the D&D art, all that sort of genre stuff. And so like book covers, and then eventually creating IP that he had a stake in longer term. Because again, like most commercial illustration is just VS work that'll always keep you living hand to mouth. Like it's just it. And even at somebody at the level and caliber of a Tony Dieter Lizzie, like
Yeah.
so
Oh yeah,
it's
I've got
insane.
I turn my kids on to like Spiderwick Chronicles, and I've got like a lot of his like the books that talk about all the creatures and stuff. I mean, I definitely love that stuff, like the watercolor stuff that he does. And I'm a huge fan. Like right here, I mean, this is actually an original painting of. I mean, this is right over my desk, so I'm a huge Jim Henson fan,
Oh, wow.
and like Dark Crystal especially is just like I was so amazed by that, because I was never really huge into fantasy. I mean, I kind of had the awareness of Lord of the Rings from like the Rankin and Bass and the Ralph Bakshi, but I never read the books or anything. So I think that I was more into like sci-fi, like Star Wars. But when Dark Crystal came around, that was kind of like, for me, it was kind of my introduction to like fantasy. And I mean, I just thought that stuff was so amazing, and I'm so excited for the Netflix series that's coming out. So.
Yeah, and especially with the technology we have today, like the hybrid of CGI and actual puppetry, like it's going to be so beautiful. Like I'm so looking forward to it. But yeah, so like I love fantasy and like hard-boiled fantasy. Like it's really cool, but the stuff that's like more so when I'm talking about my aesthetic, like it's very much like this sort of like whimsical fantasy type of stuff that's in that vein. But yeah, so now when you boil that down in the branding, right? Like, okay, it's recognizing all those things and now boiling it down and distilling it, right? Making like a stew from the marrow of those things that really matter to you. Okay, I want to make this body of work. And now I'm going to be actively doing that. But now, like when I present it, I need to do it in a way that's also coherent with the work I've done. So like when I think about, like, I'm not a great graphic designer, but what I do is like I save a lot of stuff that's from like Leica or Tim Burton animation projects that he's been involved in, or any of the Dark Crystal Labyrinth type of stuff. Like I kind of just like have like how graphic designers have swipe files, right? Like that's a thing that I got turned on to like a few years ago, and I wish I would have thought of it sooner. But essentially, like you keep swipe files, and like, okay, these are going to be the things that are going to cue into like the aesthetic I want to put out, and like just kind of repeatedly doing that, and then maybe having some hard stops of like what you don't want your work associated with. Like like maybe you have no problems with like alcohol or tobacco, but maybe you don't ever want your artwork associated with it because it would reflect poorly on your brand. So like there's a few things like that, but by and large it's really just creating like a coherent story of your work and why you do it and that sort of thing.
Yeah, definitely. So where are you picturing your brand going? What do you want to see, down the lines, as far as, obviously you have the sculptures for sale and you've got the prints, and you're talking about children's books, and kind of where do you see it going from here? Or what are you concentrating on now?
I mean, a lot of it. So, like also in terms of brand building, the people that have done really significant things are the people that are like, they're authors, like not only are they doing the art, but they're at least doing snippets of writing. So like I'm doing some stuff, like there's some ideas in my mind that I've been jotting down. I have like scraps of short stories that are in draft and things like that. And so it's really about then creating artwork that jives with it, or maybe I make a picture and then I write something about it. And like I was describing this to a friend, and then like a week later, the same description came up in an interview with Justin Gray Valentine on One Fantastic Week. And like he's another person that like aesthetically, I feel like we're kind of in the same lineage. And so like both the conclusion that he and I were describing is like, sometimes to go along with my art, all I need is like a snippet of text that's kind of like just the flavor text from a Magic the Gathering card. How there's like these like cool things that like they imply a deeper story and narrative, but it's not like a full-fledged story. It's just like a little piece of text. It just kind of like gets your imagination going a little bit. And I think to some extent, like that's an okay way of just like whetting the appetite for whatever world you're building or property. It's just like giving people enough of a glimpse that there's more to this than just the image. There's more thought to it than just this one thing you're saying.
Yeah, and the last Instagram I posted was of a sketch I did of this sort of desert dwelling lizard character. And, rather than just posting like, oh, here's just a sketch I did, I kind of just quickly, where is this guy from? What kind of world does he live on? And I just kind of lay that out real quick. I don't know how many people read the descriptions under it or whatever, or if it's just like, oh, that's cool, but I just felt like even though he's probably not a part of any larger story or anything like that, but I just thought, he needs some sort of a background or something attached to him. So I don't know if you do that when you like post on Instagram, if you're posting your characters and everything, but I like that idea. I like especially for you, because it is, I assume all your characters live in the same world and everything, right?
Well, so actually there's like, from some earlier work, there was like 3 pieces that really are the culmination of some ideas I've had. Like there's just 3 pieces that like felt like they were of that world. And so it's just like, oh, I haven't come back to this in a while. I really should come back to this sort of like ideas that I was playing with here. And like, it's been even more like, catalyzed into a stronger sense of the thing that I am trying to build. Like even so, if you caught the One Fantastic Week interview, if anybody did, like there's.
I think I was going to ask you where you're going, but I really like your description of what Dream Syndicate was. So if is that what you're going to talk about?
Yeah. So like the Dream Syndicate, right?
I love the idea behind it. So
yeah. So one of the ideas behind it is like a Fey black market, but another thing is like a more personal thing that I didn't actually get to discuss on there was if I have dreams, I never remember them. Like I have like maybe 3 or 4 dreams in the entirety of my life that I've ever remembered. And so the Dream Syndicate, like it sounds like this conspiratorial thing. So it's almost like my dreams are vaulted and locked away from me, right? So like I have the idea of just like conspiracies and vaults. So like I like the idea of characters just like uncovering things. And then the other idea of the Dream Syndicate is like it's a dream world where like dreams are like power manifest, and like it's also like currency. So that's just some ideas that I'm playing with as far as the writing of the world. Because like when you think about like, though you may not value money at all, like money is a way to like experience like dreamlike things. Like, oh, you wanted to take this dream vacation. Well, guess what? You need money. So like it's like a way of talking about like ideas of capitalism and just like, oh, the people that have all these resources get to do some exorbitant sorts of things. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that really needs to be on your website. I think because there's really no. I noticed there's really no about section on your website. There may be this. If I go deep in the blog, there might be. And I know there's on the contact page. There's a little bit about you, but I didn't see anything that kind of describes what the world is and what it's all about.
Yeah, well, when you're talking about like imagining that all the characters that I have inhabiting this world, like the truth of the matter is they don't like, and I'm working on building the characters that feel more like it. Like everything's going to be kind of like fey and goblin-y sort of looking, and like if you look at right now, a lot of the things are like, like it's a anthropomorphic like mosquito character. There's like humanoids, and like in the world I'm working on, like there's no like things that are human like analogs.
But even if they're different little worlds but they're all connected by what you're saying under this Dream Syndicate banner of these dreams that are kind of locked away from you. So in some ways that brings it all together. Because the one thing I always talk about my brand, when I first started kind of narrowing it down, I was like, well, what are the things I like to draw? I like to draw, and if you've seen any of my videos, you know this. So I like to draw robots, and I like to draw monsters. But I kind of
and other imminent threats to humanity.
Yeah, I mean, robots, aliens, zombies. So those are the kind of things I like to draw. I'm like, well, how do all these things kind of connect? And to me, it was like, well, and I've always had a thing for like Dr. Frankenstein and mad science and all that stuff. I'm like, well, this all could, and it's not that dissimilar to kind of what you're talking about, but it's like all these different things could live under the banner of this sort of clandestine underground lair where they're experimenting with alien technology, or viruses that could break out and create a zombie apocalypse, or what was or just build it. Another part of that would be like building different robotics and things. So this all could exist as sort of in that environment. So that's kind of how I tie it all together, and that was the beginning of my brand. It was basically all the things I like to do. How can I kind of shoehorn them into making sense as one brand? And I think this whole idea of the Dream Syndicate or whatever, I think it's kind of the same thing. So I just think it would make sense to kind of talk about that on the website, even if and you could even go deeper, like it's like, I don't know, when I'm thinking, since we're talking about like puppets and art dolls and all that, but like almost like Nightmare Before Christmas, where you've got Christmas Town, and then you've also got Halloween Town, but there's this central hub, and they kind of all branch out from there.
So like this is kind of the segue from branding to niche marketing, but like, I mean, the simple, painful fact of the matter is, like, artists may not want to be put cleanly and neatly into a box, but the public that consumes art wants to put you neatly in a box and be able to just pull that ribbon or put that ribbon on it. And every artist that's really like broken out, like you just see that, like, oh, they are known for doing this one type of thing. When you look at a Tony DiDerlizzi, or when you look at what Pete Moorbacher, even as a like a lot of people know of him, but he's not like Tony DiDerlizzi famous, right? Like, but like he's doing paintings of surreal angels, and like they're just looking for that. So it just, I think iconic artists, like they get known for doing just a very simple thing. And like, like if a gallery artist wanted to dramatically pivot from where they are, like, because most of it's just like sad, doe-eyed looking girls holding like candies or like whatever the thing is, the flavor of the whatever, but they can't, they're stuck in that box. They can dramatically change what they're doing, and maybe they don't even want to, but they can't for financial reasons, because that's what the art buying public expects and wants from them. So when you do pick a vector to go into, you better get really comfortable and interested with it, because otherwise,
and like you said, sometimes it's not really your choice. Like, because I've done a few different types of content on my YouTube channel, and some of the stuff does better than others. But like, for instance, the ones that get the most view are the art hack videos, but it's just, that's not a sustainable thing, where there's just not that, at least I can't come up with that many different art hacks and everything. So it's not something I could just continue to do. And I don't know that I'd want to. I mean, I like doing those videos, but I couldn't just only do that. Like I've seen a couple of artists who, I started watching their channels, and then they hit on something where it was just some crazy, stupid, just like art challenge that was kind of just ridiculous, but it gets tons of views because it is so ridiculous. And they kind of, oh, this is bringing a lot of people. So then they just start only doing that stuff. And it's like, I'm kind of always afraid if I do something that's not necessarily something I'd want to do, I put it out there to get views or whatever, that'd probably be the thing that does get views. And then I have to make the decision, okay, do I want to pursue this because financially it's a good direction to go, but maybe not creatively. So yeah, it's kind of a weird thing.
There's some categories of stuff that it's essentially, it's doing the YouTube version of trash TV, like your Desperate Housewives or whatever. Like, sure, people are going to watch it. People want to watch like a train wreck, or, I mean, not necessarily that's even train wreck, but it's just like, it is just entertainment at that point. And I don't know, like it's, as a content creator, you have to make the decision between, do you want to have a highly monetizable YouTube channel, or do you want to have a highly monetizable brand? And I think the brand is the better long-term longevity play. Like, even with my channel, I was doing some stuff where I was talking about arts and cultures and looking at art books and stuff. I privated all of those videos to really put drive the hammer home of like, no, this is who I am and this is the art I do, and this, yeah, like this is what matters. And like I even like my older tutorial stuff, there might be a certain point that I private all those videos to make it even more like crystal clear of like the things that I'm doing and the things that I'm interested in doing.
Yeah, definitely. So as far as, so we talked about your brand and everything, but you wanted to talk about like niching down. So, I mean, you said you have these different areas, you know, that there's sort of the fantasy thing. And then I saw you had some like Halloween stuff, and there's different things that may not fit that same thing. So what's your idea of niching down, or where do you see where you wanting to go with the brand and everything?
Yeah, by increments. Like, I mean, it's the same thing of like when you're, you know, a working artist, that you keep refining your portfolio anyway, of like more so going into the kinds of work that you want to be doing. Like that's just a sensible thing that you do. You edit down. And so at a certain point, I may have some of those works available for purchase as a print. But yeah, at a certain point, like I plan on graveyarding all that stuff, and like, no, this is like I am, and I may do a rebrand of what the Dream Syndicate's called because of SEO issues and stuff like that. For
Right, yeah,
a band from 40 years ago having that name. So I may, and them having then they were doing a reunion tour like a few years ago. But yeah, so that should happen. So so I may have to come up with a new name to like umbrella it all with the same concepts. But that, you know, at the end of the day, like I think it's going to be a fantasy world that's going to have a lot of fertile ground for me to play in. And like, you know, I'm interested in like, are there board games or card games in this, or like I love RPGs, like can I make a setting that fits into like one of the more open rule set games, which is probably what I'm most likely to do, like say a Fate, you know, Fate RPG or something like that, which is a very open game set, and like coming up with products that could sell as far as that goes. But yeah, so like it's really about just doing the body of the work first and the writing, and then figuring out the ways that I can, you know, eventually like go find commercial uses for these snippets of things, like, you know, like books, like novellas and short story collections, and like, you know, ecology or something like that is definitely something I want to do.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many different avenues that you could take and everything, but you know, I mean, the board game or the card game, I think I could definitely see your stuff in that realm as well. So
yeah, and because the figures are posable, right? Like all I have to do is like, oh, here's this card with this scene of characters, and so like even like for the stuff that I'm doing that's in world for the Dream Syndicate, I'm even like way less interested / probably won't for the long time, like selling the sculptures that appear in that world, because like, hey, these are way more valuable if I repeatedly shoot them over like a 5-10 year period for different things than if I go sell them for, you know, like $1,000 a shot, like, you know, and like maybe eventually by the point where I do get to sell them, or like want to slowly like maybe work on the next big project for, you know, 20-30 years, then like, oh, I can sell these for like now literally thousands of dollars because there's a nostalgia and interest for it. Yeah, like, but yeah, that being said, like it's just the on the face utility of having these characters available for whatever I need them for is super useful.
Yeah, one thing that I could definitely see that I think would be really cool. You had mentioned like you know, a card game, but even like a playing card deck. I mean, you, like you said, I don't know, you may have to, you know, you said you're not that big on graphic design, but I think if you partner with a designer to do, you know, everything, kind of the look and everything, and then concentrate on the face cards. If you create like the different characters, I mean, that's something I haven't seen that seems like it would probably do really well, that people would like to see. And I think, you know, like you said, if you put out a product like that, for instance, anything that you create for that product, I think it's going to probably help with the sell, because it's like, even if you did a Kickstarter, because I think there's a market for playing cards. People,
there absolutely is. Yeah. People like, it's a collectible, that thing that people
like. Have you seen the
Wicked Kingdom stuff?
Yeah, card stuff that she did. Yeah. I've got that set. I mean, it's just beautiful work, but I could see the same thing happening with yours. And then, you know, because if you have that physical product, because obviously, you know, the art dolls are they're a little more of an investment for somebody. But I mean, if you have something that, you know, like a playing card that you can get produced relatively cheaply and everything, I mean, it's going to be it would be probably a lot of time to create all the stuff for it. But if you could do that, kickstart that, and then as higher tiers, you know, you could have the dolls. Plus, like I said, I mean, if everyone's got this thing, they're going to be like, oh man, I love this card. I love this character on this card, man. Think if I could actually own that character. And like you said, that would kind of up the prices of the dolls themselves and everything. But, you know, I don't know if you considered that, but I mean, I think that's, you know, that would be a very interesting route to go.
Yeah, I mean, dude, like, yeah, definitely. I've drooled over the card set, and I am strongly considering picking up the Wicked Kingdom for myself. But yeah, no. When I talking about graphic design, like, I'm a serviceable enough graphic designer, and like, if I like swipe file some stuff and like, you know, modify it to make it my own, but like, yeah, like I
mean, I guess it's not that difficult, because there's, I mean, at least you may need something on the back, but even though, I mean, you can, you know, as far as the flip side and everything, that I don't know what you call that.
Well, there's the face, and then there's the back of the card, and you know, and I'd probably even like possibly like construct something that I would take a photograph of, and
that would be cool.
Yeah, lay that out.
Yeah,
like if you look at the 3rd edition D&D, like the core books for that, like there was actually a sculptural artist that like built these things that he photographed, and then like that like textural details and stuff, like that's photograph stuff that like they just printed onto these like hardback books.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like the sky's the limit. It's just like, what do you focus on first? But I don't know, that to me, that sounds like a good, you know, I always say, you know, and I don't know what I mean, you talked about stories and books and all that too, but I don't know, it just seems like that might be like a really like a good like kind of thing to kick off with, because it doesn't, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, anything that's like low barrier to entry sort of product, like that's like something like 12 images or whatever for that, or you know, like maybe 16 when you have like all the things sort of put together. So like that, you know, like because a lot of people talk about like tarot decks and like. But the conversation around tarot is like, oh, that's like 72 cards, that's 72 illustrations plus, you know, other ancillary details. So, you know, like the more sensible thing to do is an oracle deck, as opposed to, so which is like significantly less cards.
Yeah, that's cool. Hey, so Josh has been kind of silent. Is there anything you want to chime in about, Josh?
No, I'm actually really just kind of fascinated with like kind of knowing like what got you into kind of doing sculptural illustrations and sculptural, like building these sculptural worlds, like other than you mentioned some of your influences and stuff, but when did you kind of start like kind of going that route with
all
art?
Right. So, you know, it was really, really tough times. I experimented with a little bit when I was in college. But so actually, when I was in high school, I would hang out with a friend that lived a few blocks away, and we'd kind of hang out at our kitchen table or like watching some weird, you know, like usually it was like a Labyrinth sort of thing, or like what was the Jim Henson Storytellers, like that classic stuff. Like we'd have that on the background, and we'd be playing with Sculpey, making like character heads and things like that. And then, you know, I went to UArts for illustration, and you know, I wasn't the greatest, most technically adept like painter, or you know, like I had started out with color pencils, and it was like hard to get into paint and stuff like that, and all these sort of like the guardrails sort of mediums that young artists usually stick to, like pen and ink, you know, color pencils. But like when we had some projects where we were explicitly had to do experimental stuff, and whenever I did something that was 3D, the reaction from, you know, my classmates and like then the faculty was always way better, and it had to have the roots in the stuff that I was doing when I was like a teenager in high school. And then I did some like kind of diorama stuff where I did some photography of it, and it was even kind of shitty. Like it wasn't a great polished version of what I was doing. Like it even like a few years out of college to get the photography to be kind of right. Yeah, that's been an uphill battle. But there was something there that was interesting enough that I wanted to just keep going and keep pursuing. And then a more senior student saw that stuff and then turned me on to the work of Red Nose Studios, Chris Sickles, and seeing like the threshold. Like I was following, 3-dimensional illustration, like the few people that were doing it, like Liz Lomax, and there was some more like conceptual people that were doing dimensional illustration. But like when I saw Red Nose Studio stuff, I was like, that's the bar. That's the threshold of like, I need to aspire to do something that feels that complete when you look at it.
I'm going to have to write that down because I'm not familiar with that. So
Red Nose Studio. He's a person that actively like, so he did a lot of editorial work and then transitioned into some picture book stuff. But he's been actively selling the art dolls that were puppets that were in his sculptures, and he's regularly getting like $1,000 to $1,200 for per sculpture. So that's like, oh, okay, that's what the higher levels of that look like. So but as far as like trying to monetize my work, I am very much thinking more in terms of the webcomics model of like, well, you just have to keep putting content out there that people are interested in, and not really like, you have to create the work that you would create if there was no monetary like value created from it. If nobody's going to pay you, like you create that work, because it seems like that is actually the trick to success, is doing the work that like you just want to be doing, and it's like fascinating to you. And like eventually you get enough people interested, then you start worrying about how to commercialize it and make a tenable living. And you kind of have to do the things that figure out your livelihood and living up until that point.
Yeah. That's what I tell everyone. I repeat it over and over again, so people are probably sick of it. But it's like, there's so many people out there, that are looking to find somebody to pay them to do their art, or not, and pay them basically nothing, just like, oh, then it just shows that I'm a professional. Somebody's willing to pay me, even though it's really not worth your time. But I just say, just do what you want to do. Don't worry if you concentrate on that and you keep doing that and you do it enough, people are going to start to come to you, and you're going to be able to, kind of, ask what you're worth and everything. And you're going to, because when you do what you love, it's just way different than, like, okay, this person knows I can sculpt and they want me to do, I don't know, something for their, I don't know what it is. I always go,
I got somebody approach me for like a portrait of, and like it was a sad story. Like it was basically like they wanted like a funerary portrait, like art doll of this person that had passed away, and like he approached me about like buying it for like the widow of the person, but like I quoted him, and it was even like a reduced rate for what I would normally, just because like the circumstances and things like that. Like I obviously felt bad, and it was just somebody off of Instagram, right? But so I gave them a quote, and like I didn't hear anything back, and it was even like a lower rate than I would do commissioned work for somebody. But yeah, like you can't do art as a means to subsidize other people owning your art, because like at that point, like owning art is just a luxury, or like having your exact vision of what you want is also a luxury. And so you should be expecting to get a luxury rate, or just double down on working on the things that are going to have long-term lasting value for you.
I 100% agree with that. And I've said this too to creators that are working professionally, just doing illustration or graphic design in-house or animation or whatever it is. It's like those jobs come and go, and even
usually
if the
every
job
2 years or so, if Chris Oatley, like listening to his accounts of things, right? Like you have a job for like 2 or 3 years, and then they go.
That's the longest job I've ever had.
But it's kind of interesting, because it's like the thing you'll meet that you'll find consistent across the board with all those people. And like, I'm glad you brought up Chris, because he's totally an advocate of this too, is the idea that like you'll meet, like it's a very small industry, whatever industry you end up in. Like part of why Scott and I off the top were kind of curious if you knew Jeff is like, okay, like there's only so many people who are building like art dolls that can be used in like, that could look really cool in stop motion. So we're like, there's probably a pretty high likelihood you guys have like met and talked. And similarly in comics, it's like a small little world. So eventually you're going to meet a lot of your comic heroes, and animation, same thing, illustration, same thing. And the one thing you'll see across the board, you talk to people who worked at like Disney, at Leica, at like giant firms, and what do they want to talk about? They want to talk about their personal project, or they want to talk about their regret of not doing their own personal work because they're too busy doing the stuff for pay. So it's like, if you want to keep the fuel for doing it professionally, you need to like actually be doing it personally anyway, just to keep your soul as an artist. But yeah, if you can manage to just like whatever you can do to make a living while you're making that stuff, if you can just manage to keep making it, keep raising the bar on it, it's like inevitable that a market's going to present itself. And if the market doesn't, at least you'll have a body of work that you'll feel proud of, as opposed to like professional work, which the majority of time is filled with like a lot of compromise and other people's visions. And so it's I think that's really exciting. And I think you're probably on the right path with what you're working on and stuff. It's also cool to hear somebody who was working on illustration who's working in sculpture, because one of my old studio mates used to do like dioramas and sculptures mixed with painting. Mm-hmm. And ended up kind of finding a market in like the gallery world through it. But it was a very similar story where up until they had gone to grad school, they had just kind of been doing commissions and stuff like that. And then she had this realization, like, I've just wanted to do this thing that like nobody's doing. And the second she started doing that was when she started seeing like more excitement about her work, because I think you can't like fake authenticity, like I think it's like you were describing, like you were kind of trying all these different mediums, and then the one thing that kind of hits with people is the thing you're just naturally into, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, and there's something just like so immediate about forming something with your hands, like, oh, this is an interesting form or face. I mean, I do a lot of the stereotypical Illustrator process work, right? Sketches, thumbnails, and stuff like that. So I usually have a design of a character in mind before I go at doing something. Yeah. And like I actually almost like as a sketch exercise, I do want to like eventually just grab out some clay and just see what I come up with, like just just going like subconscious level. But by and large, like everything is pretty well planned out. Like when I do a dimensional illustration, like it's me trying to recreate to my best capability the sketch that I have and the color study. So yeah, everything is like formalized.
So
that's awesome.
Ryan, how do you kind of get in addition to the online stuff, do you do any like live events, shows, or anything like that? Or
so I had and maybe I commented on your video where you're talking about doing like Comic Cons and stuff like that. And I've tried a couple of local craft fairs. And at that point I had showed up and I didn't, other than like, I had open edition prints. I've tried postcards, which I think postcards aren't like the margins on postcards aren't good enough, I think, to make them a viable product. Like it's just, I've kind of come to that realization. And from talking to other people in say like the One Fantastic Week community, a lot of people tend to have that point of view. And I was like, oh, you're right. This was a bad product category to even pursue. So like open edition prints that, and like I had some of my older original sculptures, and I sold like a handful of prints. I was okay with the sculptures not really selling because I thought they were more of like a statement piece to bring people to the table and like a point of interest.
Yeah, I want to add to that in just a minute. I got an idea for you, but go ahead.
Yeah. So, like, but from those events, like, most of them were profitable, and they were all local, but none of them were worth it. Like when you look at hourly wages, like, and like just the sweat that goes into setting up a show.
I know there's more high end shows. Like, do you listen to the 3 Point Perspective podcast at all?
Yeah, I do. I'm an information sponge for everything.
Like, okay, so Lee White, who's on that show, it seems like, because he kind of works in a different world than I'm familiar with. Will Terry and Jake Parker, they do the convention, or they used to. I don't know if some of them still do and everything, but he's kind of more in these. It seems like Lee White, from what I understand, and I really know him less than the other two, but from what I hear from the show, it seems like he's doing more like these kind of higher end art, like kind of art shows, because obviously there's people that have a lot of money and they like to collect art and everything, so there's got to be a place where those people congregate. But I don't know what, and I also don't know the barrier of entry, what they cost for table space and all that kind of thing. But the one thing that go ahead.
I know one thing I was even gonna say, but I'd love to hear your point in just a sec. Like there's niche like Halloween collectible shows, like, or holiday collectibles,
right.
Like there's specific shows just for that too, like, and a lot of sculptural work gets sold there and things like that.
So here's kind of, and you may have thought of this before, I don't know, but so I'm looking at your prints. You create the dioramas, you photograph them and everything, and then you've got the sculptor, so you've got the physical piece plus the printed piece. But I'm wondering if, and again, this would, I don't know how well you're able to move the art dolls, and this would even be a higher tier item than that. But I think at the very least it would create just an awesome set piece for you to show, But like, have you ever considered like getting like a thick kind of a shadow box and creating almost like a piece of art that can hang, like where you can create the scene with the doll in it, and it's basically like, could have a frame around it, but it would be, there's some depth to it where you've got a scene. So it's almost like you've got your print, but it's 3-dimensional and everything. Have you considered anything like that?
I mean, that would be an interesting sort of tangent to go on. I mean, physically transporting pieces like that would be a little it'd be tricky. Like if you're going to shows and like hauling that, and like there's only so many that you could bring, like that would have to be like
but it could only be one, like I'm just as like I said, as a set piece, and you just kind of see what the reaction was, and it might even have something to think about for later on down the road, once the individual pieces start selling and people kind of maybe are looking for something more. But I just think that I mean, I definitely would be definitely out of my price range, but it just sounds like a really cool idea, because I've seen people like where they'll do like a paper cutout. They'll take, sometimes like they used to do back in the, I don't know how old you are, but back when records were the thing at like Tower record stores, they would take they get all these posters of like whatever the new album was, and then they'd cut them out, and then they'd stack them and make them 3D and do all this kind of stuff. But I've seen people do that kind of thing with in these shadow boxes and stuff. But yeah, it just seems like that would be a really cool, interesting thing. I don't know that I've seen that before, and it seems like that would just be a really cool way to showcase your artwork.
I mean, the thing that I'm really thinking about, when I can get things really rolling, like this is like things are humming along when this happens, is like, say I have a book or two out, and my ultimate idea is to actually do like a touring exhibit of like the figures, and then have like these like limited edition and open edition prints for sale, like all this merchandising around the IP. And so have the sculptures, like it's like going to see a Leica exhibit or a Tim Burton exhibit, but also like here's all the merchandise. And like I don't know if that's partnering with like arts and cultures organizations or museums or whatever around the country, but the idea of like the same way that an author has like a book tour, like a slightly more elaborate version of that. Like I spent all this time creating this tangible product for people to buy, say a book, and then like create these like experiences for people to go check it out. And maybe I could collaborate with art spaces, like say a Meow Wolf or something, where a really enhanced like tactile experience could happen that feels like the world or something.
Yeah, because I've done like one, I guess maybe two art. I did a solo show and a group show. And yeah, that was just kind of for my, my prints. It's kind of the same stuff that I had at Comic Cons and everything. But in addition, because we were talking about sort of that high end thing, but if there's any way to do like something with like an art space, like you said, because I think your stuff would really show well in like a sort of a gallery setting.
I've shown and sold my work through galleries in the past, but the same, like a lot of the same problems that like jobbing illustrators have, so do gallery artists. Like when you have to split
Big cut.
half of what you're profiting off of selling a work, and then there's the expenses of framing and printing and shipping costs and all those sorts of things, which means that if you're splitting it, well, you have to make double what you need to make to have a sustainable living, is what that means. So it's just, again, another route that like that there's very prolific and by outward appearance successful artists. Like I have some friends and acquaintances that are like, they're people that get written about in juxtapose and high fructose and stuff like that, but they need a day job to sustain their living, or they have a spouse that's really the breadwinner. Because again, like the arts is like, when you're dependent on somebody else and you don't figure it out for yourself, like that just seems like what the outcome is. And even gallery space, it's like there's artists that like, I've run some numbers and like, okay, well, if it takes you X amount of time to prep for the show and the things that you're selling are like heavy and bulky, well, it's going to be expensive to ship them. And like all these things, like you run it down, like, okay, you might be busting your ass to make like what, 40-50K a year. Like, I don't really like, and especially like if you're like grinding to make that kind of money, that's not really, I'm not impressed.
Yeah. But like you mentioned, I mean, I think it is just kind of, like you said, kind of building your presence, putting out more work, and building up a base around that. But I think, if you got a decent enough following, I mean, there's no reason why at some point you couldn't like skip the whole like gallery.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I'm basically
like a pop-up store, like. Yeah, just because there's so many spaces out there that people aren't even using, that it's like it's just sitting there. And so if you could talk to whoever owns the space, if it's a good enough high traffic area or enough people that you are in an area where you could draw people to it, just like, hey, what would you charge me just to have like a pop-up store in here?
I mean, a bar with a private room in a neighborhood, right? Like that can get locked at the end of the night or whatever. Like, that would be great. Or like, I mean, there's lots of fine artists that do like, what you're talking about regarding Lee White. Like, he's paying for that booth space and then he's not splitting anything with anyone else, right? Yeah. So again, like, and honestly, I think the gallery that really wins it is when they switch to a patronage, like a Patreon sort of model, like, and starts saying, hey, artists, you can show here, bring people here, make my clients happy, maybe have some events. And they take a cut of $0 because all their funding is worked out through people that aren't the artists. Like, unless things dramatically change, like I think that is any artist that's taking zero from the artist, any gallery that's taking zero from the artist is going to be the gallery that friggin' wins it all. From like they're going to get all the best artists to come to them.
Unfortunately, I mean, it's kind of that thing. It's just like, and that's what I'm trying to do. That's what pretty much everyone's trying. I mean, you just have to build. You have to build the demand for your work. You have to build an awareness for it. Once you do that, I mean, it's almost like you can write your own ticket, because all these ideas will come to you. I mean, all these opportunities can come to you, or you can make these opportunities if you have the people that are interested in getting your work.
Yeah. And just to reinforce what Ryan was talking about too, like a really good friend of mine started doing the whole gallery circuit, got represented, ended up in like he started at like De La Jesus and like a couple like pretty key like hipster LA gallery areas.
Not lose De Jesus, but yeah.
Well, anyhow, I don't know. I don't really follow the whole gallery thing, but he was showing in them and he was selling paintings for like $10,000-$20,000, and I was like, dude, that's crazy. But then I remember talking to him about it 2 years in, and he was like, I'm just going back to doing illustration. And I was like, well, dude, but you were selling paintings for like $10,000-$20,000. And he's like, yeah, well, okay, so it takes about a year, build a body of work for a show. You sell 1 or 2 paintings. So like, when you're starting out, so you're going to sell 1 or 2 paintings for like $10,000-$20,000. Great. Okay. Now cut that in half. So now if you sold 2 for like $10,000, you've just made $10,000 for a year of work. It's like, and when I heard that math, and then have met a couple people who even did like Art Basel and stuff, and like it's a very similar story where it's like, if you're fortunate, you're making like 40 or 50 a year. If you're the uncanny, you can pull a lot of profit from that. But the majority of people, like, showing in those galleries, it's a very similar hustle to commercial work. And then the downside of that too is like, you're not just having to do a similar hustle to commercial work, but you're having to kiss up to like some of the wealthiest people on the planet. Whereas like when you're illustrating, you're working with like smaller companies and small businesses and sometimes large businesses, but they're usually people who are kind of middle class. Suddenly you're having to kind of brown nose like the larger, wealthier world and kind of play this role, and like like was being said at the top, like kind of repeat the same thing. So if you sell drip paintings, you get to, that's what you do. That's what you do forever. And if you change it, it's a whole thing. So like, I do think like looking for ulterior ways to like get in, like, or IPs, like your own kind of intellectual property that you can make your own products from, make your own gallery spaces. I think that's right. And I agree too. If you cut out the middleman, I think with Scott and I, we've talked about this a lot too, where distributors with books are like the big dark middleman that kind of takes like a mass amount of the profit and makes it very hard to put out a book and really make anything on it. And so like, I think these split avenues of like Patreon, like if more publishers, more distributors, more galleries, more people kind of that are the middlemen for art start embracing models that are a little more conducive for like artists to actually make a profit, I think you'd see like a pretty dynamic shift in what people are making, Does that make sense?
I also think that probably about half of galleries just need to die because like there's too many of them, like for it to be tenable for everyone. Like, so like there's too many galleries because it's like, galleries are kind of like a socialite's hobby, so and most of them last for 2 or 3 years and like, oh, I'm kind of done with this, or this is literally untenable. It was harder than I thought. So yeah, there's that. My other thought on galleries just in general is that at a certain point I would probably pursue it like as a means to sell like open and limited edition prints, like things that are sold in volume. Because once I have like a lot of things that are reproducible, like say card decks or books or whatever, there's a certain point where getting the awareness from the gallery and like the cachet of being shown there is absolutely worth it to take a hit for like, lose $100 or whatever. But I have like marketing of people that buy art and interest. And like, please keep playing that game across the country, but it won't be until like things are well rolling and I have a thing to like show people. And it's like, it gets more into the discussion of like lifetime value of the customer, right? Like once I get this awareness of people that progressively start to know me more and more, that's, that seems like an interesting play to me. And I think there's some people like, I think if Pete Moorbacher with his Angelarium property, like started to make that play across galleries across the country too, like his following's already huge. And like, I think he could probably double it in like a year if he played aggressively. So
and that's a good point, kind of tying back into the thing you were mentioning about kind of craft fairs or conventions, like comic conventions in case of like Scott and I. It's like generally that's the main reason you're doing a comic convention, not just to sweep up, but to actually like amplify the word about what you have out. So like, in the case of a book, it's like it's a good opportunity to advertise to like hundreds of people in 2 days, whereas like if you don't have a built up IP, then like it can be a throwaway, because at most you're maybe making, a little over table, maybe you make like $1,000 or something. But if you calculate like the time and the investment and the hotel and the food and all of that into it, it's just kind of a loss unless you're really trying to push an IP out there and amplify like the word about like what you're doing.
I actually question like the validity of indie comics in a Comic-Con space anymore
Yeah,
because
I
it's
agree with
such
that.
a media like sideshow. I so comics, like, I mean, especially if it's like a long form thing,
Yeah.
but there, and I'm no expert in the comic world remotely, but like it just seems like it's such a deeper, more intimate connection that you're building with someone, because they have to like sit with the art and the words to really digest it. And I
Yeah.
think everything is just so rapid fire speed dating in a Comic-Con floor that
Yeah.
like that's why like the big like indie IP like illustrators are winning the day, because like, oh, it's cool Norse mythology or space North mythology or
Yeah.
whatever, like where like they don't have to digest a story because the image just says it all in this one thing. Whereas like, the storytelling that happens in comics is often a lot more subtle, or just you have to sit with it a long time. And like,
Yeah.
I don't know, like I think if I were a comics creator again, I would probably largely go the webcomics model of like constantly show like the comic online, and not do the thing where you wait to publish a book and try to sell it, like pre-sell everything, like give all the content away for free and then like monetize a book or have a Patreon or something
That's
like
what
that.
Judge was doing. So yeah.
Yeah. That's the plan. I mean, it is interesting because it's such a changing landscape, and Scott and I have talked about it too. Like, just the idea of finding alternative venues. I mean, I do like a band thing for fun on weekends, but I bet if I sold my comics like at a bar show, like I'd probably sell more comics there than I would at a lot of comic conventions.
Or like at hipster like coffee shops, like
Yeah.
having them at the corner of a coffee shop, like might be a good thing, like a little
Yeah,
indie.
so more treating it like an independent book, and how you market an independent book, I think would probably be more effective.
Yeah, any place that like people are gonna sit and take the time with a thing, right?
Yeah,
Like I makes a lot more sense.
I agree. Yeah, that's really cool. Um, in the chats, I just wanted to mention that Christopher said, "Scott, you're looking like you've gotten some sunlight lately."
It might just be the lighting. It probably. I mean, I'm out every day, jogging and stuff. So yeah.
Was that like your humble brag, where you're like, "Oh, excuse me, I'm having trouble fitting on the screen with my giant muscles."
It's swell.
Well, also in the chat, Pepper says he likes my idea of the shadow boxes, and says he knows a guy in Colorado that does kind of a similar thing with terrariums and fairy figures. That sounds really cool, actually. So, but yeah, I mean, there's just so many different avenues. I mean, I'm sure you have too, Ryan. I'm sure you've like, oh man, I can do this or I can do that, and then at some point you got to figure out what's priority and everything. But I mean, just there's just so many different avenues you could take what you're doing, and I think it's just obviously getting it out there. But do you have a mailing list, or have you started doing a mailing list yet?
So I have a mailing list. I have not created the right bait to get people to really.
Yeah, that's the key. And I started way too late on mine. I mean, it's never too late, but I wish I would have started earlier. But yeah, I mean, there's got to be some cool thing that you could do to entice people. And I mean, I could think of a lot of things like you're talking about. In your mailing list, like I don't know, it would make sense to do like a brief story or like just, yeah.
So that's the thing. Like I was thinking, like, it's in business terms, there's the loss leader, like which your comic maker studio assets is a loss leader. Like it's front loaded work. You're not making any money from it, but it's the idea of it's your lead magnet to like, further monetize whatever whatever resources you can create for people that people are going to value. So for me, like, maybe it's like I thought of like maybe doing like paper dolls, like downloadable paper dolls people can like have outfits for. I have to figure out a way to do that because typically they're drawn, so I don't know if there's like a good way to photo. I've kind of tried to get shots of them on seamless paper, but it still seems like a real pain in the ass to go and clip it out in Photoshop or whatever. But that might be ultimately what I have to do. But the other thing is like maybe a little like 6-page short story that you get for signing.
Yeah, I think an ebook, illustrated ebook would work pretty well. I think, it's got to be, yeah. That might be my go-to in your situation, I think. But there's a number of ways you can do it. I mean, for me, like the starter kits, it's something that even if there's probably a lot of people that just download it just because they want it. They probably don't care.
Where can they download that, by the way? Just kind of
where can they get it?
You can get that at circworks.com. You just go there and you can download it.
And how much does that cost exactly?
It's absolutely free, but we're getting close, but we're not quite at the end. We're going to have to be wrapping up soon, but I can go into all that before we sign off here. But I don't know, before we, is there what, because we are getting close to the end, what haven't we talked about that you really wanted to mention, Ryan? Is there anything that we haven't touched on yet?
So we've just talked about some general theory and branding on stuff, but we didn't really delve that deep into niche marketing and like what that entails. So, and this is the strongest thesis for this is made through the One Fantastic Week community, but it's like to do niche marketing, it's about doing a specific set of work for a specific group of people, like creating art that's like the avatar for a group or culture. Whether that's like on Instagram, there's a really strong like witch thing that's happening, right? There's fairies. There's always going to be people that are interested in angels or paganism or like. So it's got to be the thing that again like is an authentic, real thing that you do and are interested in, but is done for a specific group of people. And then from there, what you do is you disseminate and tell people about what you're doing, not in this very spammy marketing way, but like talk about what the piece is about. Is there a story? Put that out there. And because the absolute like worst marketing in the world is when you just go hang out to where artists and webcomics creators make work and share their stuff. You go look, all those communities, unless you're a famous artist in those spaces, are dead. Nobody says anything. Nobody likes anything. So like, there'll be like 1 to 3 likes, which is like nothing on a Facebook webcomics group. So, like you got to find, is your webcomic about like being a mom? Go to like mommy groups and like talk about like being a parent. And like you have to do some activity that's not related to marketing at all. So your space is seen in the virtual space. That's
exactly what I need to do with because I kind of split between, most of what I do, on YouTube and everything, the people that are comic book artists or aspiring comic book artists or comic book hobbyists or just people that like are interested in comics. Maybe they aren't artists, but they're interested in what's behind, how they're made or whatever. So that kind of I'm constantly concentrating on, and that's where all the like digital products like the starter kit and all that comes into play. But the whole other world of like all my prints and things like that are more geared towards like kind of that geeky, geek culture and science in particular, the whole mad science thing. I mean, science teachers and people, tech people that they love, the kind of the humor and just the aesthetic of all that. But I'm not doing a good job of reaching out to those people because it's a totally separate thing. Like, I mean, I need to, I don't know if a Facebook group is the way to go. Build something, where I'm, posting just different bits of like science humor, science facts, and gradually sprinkling in some of my other stuff and building sort of a community around that. I don't know, but I know just by exhibiting at cons and stuff, the people and they're few and far between, but the people that really are interested in what I'm doing, it's like, oh, I'm a science teacher, or I've had like rocket scientists and just all that kind of stuff. And they're the ones that really gravitate to that. So if I can kind of go where they're at, I mean, that's exactly what you're talking about. I'm just not doing the best job at it right now. So
yeah, I mean, for you, like, so your comic creator stuff, like, that's a B2B product, right? Because it's people that like, even if they're not there yet or remotely professional, like they're aspiring to be a professional by downloading to make comics. So that serves a completely different audience than your B2C sciencey stuff.
Right.
And for that, like I would find the niche spaces where they're hanging out. Like,
Yeah.
are there subreddits for like nerdy science humor, or
Yeah.
like ask a scientist type of thing, or like and same thing, like every single like content mill type of website that presence that's on Facebook and stuff like that, they all have places to submit your content. Like, say if you have a video that like is like well made or interesting, like so like I had one of my pieces on like both Spotlight and People Are Awesome because they're made by the same company, but like Spotlight's like they just show off artist stuff, and like between those two pages, like they have like 15 million people that follow them. So like just by number, like target market wise, it wasn't great because it wasn't like the right group of people for this Captain Ahab piece that I'd done. And there were some things about the execution of the launch of it that I wasn't thrilled about. Like, it's a very Westerner story, but they launched it at like 3 a.m. East Coast time. And like, there's like a lot of like important music choices and all these kinds of things. But that being said, like, I want to try to always push things to like, can I get something to have a semi-viral moment? Can I have something like that happen once or twice a year, and like other big exposure things? Like I got in the piece written about on Laughing Squid, right, which is another like big mass market stuff, and like you'll see things that are in like fantasy genre, but yeah, like if you have like like in series like 10 pieces to submit to like Laughing Squid, and like, oh, here's a bunch of science jokes or things like that, like that's going to get shared and distributed to the people that like essentially you want people to either have sharing that thing to be a referendum on who they are, or vice versa. Somebody shares it to them because they're like, oh, my buddy who is this kind of person, like, oh, that's so
Yeah,
them, right?
exactly. Yeah, I mean, even like, one of the things that I should concentrate more on, because I've got a somewhat of a following like on Pinterest, even. I don't know if it's considered following, but it's like I'm looking at it now, and I don't know if this is a big number or not. It sounds decent, but it says 8.7K monthly viewers, and I've got boards on there with that kind of stuff, that science humor. But I need to start putting more of my own stuff on there, like a t-shirt design, because you can link to that, right to that, and generally when people go to Pinterest, the reason why they're on, a lot of the reason why they're on there is to buy. That's where they get ideas of things to buy or things to build or whatever. So if I can put it like a clever gag or something on a shirt, post it on one of the boards. So, and at one point I was doing that, but I just it's just like, I don't know, there's just so many different things. It's like if I had the money, I would hire somebody to do all this stuff for me. So
yeah, it's interesting to like hear this thinking too, because I was just talking about this a couple of weeks ago where I have this problem with my own personal work where I don't market it as if I'm marketing for someone else. And so one of my goals when I finish my graphic novel is to actually start marketing it as if it's a product that I didn't make. And I've always been good at that with single illustrations, just with like the full comic, like with the larger body of work. Like it's so time consuming to make that I forget to kind of do that stuff. And so, but I have seen that be productive, like, with like a couple of the t-shirt designs I've made in the past have been like everywhere. And it's exactly that kind of channel where it was like Laughing Squid picks it up. And then there was like, forgetting, it was like Super something. It's another one of those aggregation sites that like everybody goes to, and it just kind of spread all over. And these are like, that happened with like maybe 4 or 5 designs, and those 4 or 5 designs like 10 years later are still selling without any marketing. And like if I could get that kind of niche, like marketing with t-shirts, it's like an easier niche at the time I got in to kind of find, because like I was part of a community and a hub that kind of spread that stuff. But it's like with a comic about faith and mental illness, like I don't know, like you're bringing up some pretty interesting stuff, because I'm thinking maybe I should hit like mental illness and depression and like stuff like that, like Facebook groups and stuff.
Dude, I guarantee there are groups for like people that have walked away from their faith, their church. I guarantee that is a thing that exists, probably 10 times over. So like,
backwards.
What's that?
It's kind of the opposite story, though.
Oh, it's about finding faith. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there is some things about.
I can't go the Christian market. I know that, though, because like that market, like, it's not like squeaky clean enough to be like profitable, and also I'm not right leaning, so that becomes problematic too.
I mean, okay, so I mean, there's probably some like hip. Like so here we have Circle of Hope, like they're the hip young brand of Christianity. I don't know, like they run like thrift stores, and like I don't know what their politics are fully, but it seems like they're at least slightly left leaning. So like maybe there's some, like doing some research and finding like the sort of like, where do the progressive Christians hang out? Like,
it's a tough one to know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's I don't know, there's a couple niches that it touches on as a story that I can kind of start hitting, but it is it's a good conversation to have because it's a good reminder to kind of actually do that work.
Yeah, Josh, I'm pretty sure that I'm the person that you had that conversation with online that was talking about marketing the things like I put that comment on YouTube. So yeah, I saw you replied. So
cool.
So it was me. Yeah,
that's awesome. Let's see. Oh, somebody was asking a question, but I guess before we wrap and stuff, but somebody was asking a question. Do you have any experience branding your art under different names or companies? Like if you have a different name brand for mature material than PG stuff?
Yeah, that's always a tough one. Yeah.
I know Kevin did that for a little bit.
Go ahead. So Brad Geiger would be the person to
I was going to say that too. But it's kind of the same thing. It's just there's two versions of the same thing. He's got the After Dark version of his comic strip that's behind the paywall and that's not safe for work. And then I think he's got, I assume he does I guess the free version is the tamer version, right?
Yeah. Well, and my feeling is too, though, like, if the things that you're doing are drastically different from one another, like, so I would, like come up with a sub brand of the thing, like After Dark, because I think it's really, really solid handling of it. But if it's drastically different from it, like, well, I mean, if you're trying to pursue it and you're not like making it right, like, or you're only doing kind of so at it, like, are you gonna do a couple 2-3 things like mediocrely? Like, I mean, to me, like, it doesn't make sense to spread yourself so thin. Like, I think you have to go into something full bore for like 3 to 5 years and then figure out, is this thing working? And then you can decide that you can maybe chip away at this other idea, like sometimes scratch out notes or sketches or whatever, but like you have to pick one darling and go full bore into that thing. Because to be half pregnant on it, I think it just makes literally no sense.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. I know Kevin Cross for a little bit was toying with the idea and made like a fake persona that would do pinups.
I forget what his name was.
I can't remember. It was pretty great.
Artie Slamo.
Yeah, Artie Slamo. So and like that was an interesting experiment, but I don't know if it was sustainable.
It's hard enough to concentrate on one persona, let alone 2 or 3. It's like I'm talking, just with my own stuff. It's like there's sort of that divide between these two areas, which I see them as sort of connected, but it doesn't seem like my audience does because they don't really cross over as far as the audience is concerned so much.
Let's say hypothetically though, like you're a really successful like children's book illustrator who does a lot of like squeaky clean illustrations, and then you want to do kind of pornographic drawings. Like, yeah, you might want.
There's so many good examples of that too.
Well, and from that point, when you're this super successful thing, well, then like, all right, you should hire out some of the things that would happen in your studio, some of the marketing things, like things that like, okay, if you have resources, right, you can free up time with money, so you can then make more money. Like if that's, I mean, obviously, like it's just the creative expression part of it, but it gives you the cover to do it. Like, at that point, like maybe you have like a cleaning person come into your place. So like, again, it's like all this life stuff doesn't fall by the wayside while you're simultaneously pursuing 2 careers.
Yeah. But I agree. I would say unless you're that rare case where you have loads of money and you're super successful at it, maybe focus on one thing at a time. At least my mentality is like that. I can't have split focus. And I think it's also similar because it's like if you're following something you're passionate about, like you don't want to split your passions too much. I mean, that, I don't know, that can be really problematic.
I mean, the problem with like, well, like if anyone uses the term priority, right? You can't have like 10 priorities because it like denigrates the word priority. Like it's not, if everything's the equal weight priority, then nothing is actually a priority, right? Like you can.
Art director, I have that conversation all the time. I always have to remind people, like, you realize if everything's rush, nothing's rush. Like, that's just, yeah.
We'll probably be wrapping it up. I just want to address sort of, a debate that's kind of going on in the chat as far as online marketing versus, real world marketing. Yeah, of course. I mean, I personally, I mean, I think one of the persons in the chat is saying that it's almost like online marketing is kind of useless or not worth it. But I mean, it's both. I mean, I've definitely been doing a lot of real world stuff, going to, just conventions and going to, conferences and all that kind of stuff and meeting people. I mean, in some ways I agree that that's definitely more effective because anytime you can meet somebody in person, but that doesn't discount the value of online marketing. But I'm not going to, I don't want to get into all that because we're too kind of close to the end. But you need to pull out all the stops. I mean, it's just, you got to get out and shake hands with people and meet with people and talk to people. But obviously don't sleep on online, because I mean there's so many avenues of marketing online, and just to not focus on that at all, it just kind of, it seems like you're doing yourself a disservice. But so let's kind of start to wrap this up and everything. Any before we do, I know we asked you before, is there anything else that you wanted to put a pin on or anything like that, Ryan, before we close it out?
Yeah, I mean, just like, may as well, like, I'm good with being in this sort of like niche marketing discussion, but like, there's so many artists within the last 15 years that wouldn't have had the career that they have if it wasn't for online marketing, right? Like for getting their stuff out in front of audiences that would never have known they existed, having opportunities, having things take off, and getting in front of the right people. And like a lot of that's serendipity, the same serendipity that would be maybe meeting the right people face to face. But I'll tell you what, like the serendipity that the right people are going to be in the exact same zip code that you happen to be in a given weekend versus the entirety of the world at any given moment. Like, yeah, I'm going to take the latter because that just makes statistics sense, that like the odds are much more in your favor.
Yeah. And I'll second that because, like, in my own personal experience, like face to face has led to a lot of sales, like, and income for myself. But online marketing has led to me making graphics that end up on like a television show for like 4 seasons on the set, and I don't even know how it got there. Like,
yeah, you can't plan for it. You have, I mean, it's still serendipitous, but
but it's like the reach is a little broader. It's not that wasn't possible before, it just makes it more possible. Yeah.
Teresa said you just made it here live. we're about to shut it down. But
no, Teresa, well, hi and bye.
All right, so let's see. So I guess we'll start off with Josh. So anything you got coming up? You got any more shows coming up or anything like that?
No, thank goodness, no. Just basically gonna try to get this comic completed. So you can follow what I'm doing on YouTube, going to Joshua Kemble. You can also read my comic about faith and mental illness that I hand draw, hand write, hand letter, and hand ink, and then hand to you hopefully someday in print. Till that day, you can read it online at quarterlystories.com. And then, and I just wanted to say it's been a real pleasure talking to you, Ryan, and we'll have to have you back on because I know we kind of bounced around to a bunch of different topics, but I feel like there's still a lot more on this like niche subject that we can probably touch on at another time. So
Yeah,
yeah.
we can absolutely niche down on that. But yeah, so if you wanted to check out what I'm doing, there's the Dream Syndicate Art Dolls on YouTube. The dreamsyndarts.com is my website, and dream_synd_arts is my Instagram handle. So
Yeah,
thanks so much for having me on, guys.
yeah,
Appreciate it.
definitely. There is a link to Ryan's YouTube channel, and if I can remember, I'll try to go in and post the. I have to. I don't know if I'm following you on Instagram. I'll have to go check that out because I'm sure there's tons of cool stuff on there. So, and then a link to the website and everything. Hopefully, I can remember to go add that as well. So yeah, thanks Ryan for coming on, and thank you to everyone in the chat. Like I said, you're on my channel, and as we mentioned earlier, if you are a comic book creator or you'd like to be a comic book creator and you're looking for some cool tools to get started, I've got the Comic Maker Starter Kit. It is free. You just go to my website, sign up for the mailing list, which also has other tons of value. Usually put one newsletter out every month with tips and exclusive video and all that kind of stuff. But the Comic Maker Starter Kit has templates and brushes and what else? Fonts, all kinds of stuff to help you create comics, sound effects, all that kind of cool stuff. So that is available at circbooks.com. And once again, thanks to Ryan, thanks to the chat, and we will see you guys. Oh, I forgot. I got to talk about the mailing list for this show. So basically all that mailing list is just to let you know when we're going to go live, because we're on every week, but we're not always on at the same time. We're not always on at the same channel. It flips back and forth from Josh's channel to my channel. But if you want to know exactly when we're going to be on, what day, what time, all that stuff, just sign up for that mailing list, and we don't spam you or anything. Just about a half hour before we go live, we'll send out a newsletter with a link to where we're going to be. So that's the easiest way to find out when the Artcasters is going to be on. So definitely check that out. And yeah, that's going to do it for this week, and we will see you next week, most likely on Josh's channel. Oh, wait, next week, Thursday, I think, is the 4th. So it might be on a Wednesday. We'll have to talk about that, but that's why you got to join the mail list so you know when we're going to be on. So, all right, we'll see everyone later.